She stood in front of the class, holding the violin they gave her as a joke. Everyone expected her to fail, but when she played the first note, their laughter died. What happened next silenced the whole room and changed everything. But let's start from the beginning. Tiana Brooks had never felt so alone in her life. 15 years old, fresh out of the south side of Chicago, she stood at the gates of Madison High, a pristine, ivy-covered suburban school where smiles were tight and whispers traveled faster than Wi-Fi. Her backpack weighed heavy on her shoulders, but not nearly as heavy as the violin case she clutched like a lifeline. That case wasn't just a container for wood and strings. It was the last piece of the world she knew, the only part of herself she dared bring into this new one. The morning air was sharp, the kind that cuts deeper when you already feel exposed. The students passed her by in designer jackets and perfect hairstyles, eyes flickering over her long braids, her thrift store coat, her silence. Nobody spoke. Nobody smiled. But she'd grown used to that. Inside, the hallways smelled like money. Polished floors, glossy trophies, teachers who wore ties instead of t-shirts. Back home, school was survival. Here, it felt like theater. And she wasn't cast in the lead. She wasn't even on the script. Her mom had taken the job in a neighboring suburb after years of struggling. It was a better opportunity, a better neighborhood, a better life. But no one told Tiana that better sometimes meant whiter, and whiter meant she'd be seen as different the moment she opened her locker. In her third period music class, that difference became a weapon. The moment she stepped inside, carrying her violin case, the room tilted, not physically, but emotionally. The looks, the murmurs, the raised eyebrows. She walked past the rows of shiny chairs and fancy cellos, feeling their stares burn into her back like heat lamps. Jason was the first to laugh. Blonde, broad-shouldered, always holding court in the back of the room. Brittany and Chloe, his usual satellites, snickered beside him like a Greek chorus of cruelty. "A violin?" Jason said loud enough for the room to hear. "What is this, Juilliard tryouts?" Brittany rolled her eyes, twirling a pen between her French manicured fingers. Maybe she thought it was America's Got Talent or something. The teacher, Mr. Denvers, barely looked up from his laptop. Tiana kept walking, found an empty seat and set her case down carefully, deliberately. If she acted like it didn't hurt, maybe it wouldn't. But inside, she could feel her heartbeat thudding against her ribs like a warning drum. Not again. Not again. Back in her old school, music was her shield. She'd won citywide competitions, even played at the local cultural center. Her community respected her. She was the girl with the gift. Here, she was just the new girl, the poor girl, the black girl with the violin, an anomaly in a sea of expectations she didn't match. Mr. Denvers called for volunteers to demonstrate technique. That's when Jason stood up. "Miss Brooks," he said mockingly, holding a worn-out school violin like it was a tray of rotten food. "You brought your own instrument, right? But just in case it's like broken or from a pawn shop or whatever. Here." He walked over, grinning wide, and offered the violin with a dramatic bow. Brittany and Chloe burst out laughing. Someone in the back muttered, "This is gonna be good." Tiana didn't move. Her face was stone, but her fingers clenched tightly on the handle of her case. She could feel the air shift. All eyes were on her, not in admiration, but in gleeful anticipation of humiliation. That silent, toxic hunger for someone else's embarrassment. That moment where they could laugh and feel better about themselves. She opened her case slowly. Every motion felt like a battle. Her hand shook slightly, not from fear of playing, but from fury and shame. She could feel heat crawling up her neck. She had done nothing. She had walked into class.
That was enough for them. Jason was still hovering. "No? You sure? You could borrow this one. Might be a little above your level, but—" She looked up. Their eyes met, and for a fraction of a second, Jason saw something in her expression that made him stop. Not anger. Not fear. Just clarity. She didn't speak. Words would give them more to twist. Instead, she lifted her own violin from the case and stood. The laughter dimmed slightly, replaced by a ripple of uncertainty. Mr. Denvers blinked. "Miss Brooks, are you offering to play?" She gave a small nod. Her fingers moved with practiced ease, tuning the strings, setting her bow. Every muscle in her body remembered the movements. Her mind went somewhere else, somewhere safer, somewhere stronger. She raised the violin to her chin. Someone chuckled. Then she played, and the room went silent. The bow touched the strings. For a split second, the room still expected a joke, an awkward squeak, a clumsy stumble. Something to confirm what they all believed, that Tiana didn't belong. That her presence was an accident in a place built for kids with private tutors, music room trophies, and weekends at expensive conservatories. But then came the first note. It wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy. It was soft, almost tender. A single, deliberate stroke that hung in the air like smoke. And in that moment, something changed. Tiana wasn't standing in a high school classroom anymore. She was somewhere else entirely. A place made of memory and defiance and music so sharp it could cut through every whisper and sneer. She moved into the second phrase. A delicate arpeggio climbed up the scale, then dropped, spiraled, and resolved itself in a minor key. She was playing Carmen Fantasy, a furious, complex piece usually reserved for competitions or conservatories, something that demanded skill, timing, and soul. The classroom held its breath. Jason, who just minutes ago mocked her with a smug smirk, was frozen. His hand still held the loner violin, now limp at his side. Brittany had stopped chewing her gum. Chloe was no longer scrolling her phone. Even Mr. Denvers had set his laptop aside and was now staring, mouth slightly open. Tiana's body swayed gently with the music, eyes closed, the bow an extension of her will. Each note came faster, sharper, climbing to a crescendo that turned silence into awe. She wasn't just playing to impress, she was reclaiming her voice. With every motion, she spoke the words she never got to say. Every ounce of rage, humiliation, and silence she'd swallowed. It all came out in melody. Her thoughts drifted to the days when she used to practice for hours in a cramped apartment, ignoring the noise from the street below. Her mom working double shifts, her fingers blistering. Her grandfather, her first teacher, gently guiding her bow hand, whispering, "Let them hear your heart." That's what she was doing now. She hit the climax of the piece, a breathtaking flurry of notes that surged like a storm, and the classroom finally shattered. Not with noise, but with awareness. They weren't just watching a girl play the violin, they were witnessing something undeniable. When she played the final note, a drawn-out, aching vibrato that sounded like a cry and a goodbye all at once, she held it for just long enough to let them sit with it. Then she lowered the violin. The silence was deafening. No laughter, no applause. Just shock. Then, from the hallway, came a single clap. Everyone turned. At the door stood Mr. Holland, the school janitor. An older black man with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes, holding a mop in one hand and a trash bag in the other. He had paused his work, leaning against the doorframe, watching everything unfold. He clapped again. Once. Twice. And on the third, the room seemed to remember how to breathe. A few students hesitantly followed, not out of politeness, out of something deeper.
guilt, admiration, maybe even shame. Mr. Denvers finally stood. "Tiana, that was extraordinary." She didn't respond. She couldn't. Her heart was still pounding. Her hands shook, not from nerves, but from the sheer release of emotion. She sat down, carefully placing her violin back in its case like it was something sacred. Jason opened his mouth but said nothing. For once, he had no comeback. His smirk was gone. His eyes dropped to the floor. Brittany whispered something to Chloe, but neither laughed this time. They just sat there, small in their silence. After class, Tiana gathered her things, ready to disappear again. She moved fast, not wanting to face whatever fake sympathy or uncomfortable stares would follow. But Mr. Holland was waiting outside the door. "That was something else," he said softly. "You play like someone who's been through a lot." She paused, surprised. "I guess I have." He nodded, then smiled. "Keep playing. Don't let them take that from you." Tiana's eyes welled up before she could stop them. She blinked fast, gave him a small nod, and walked away down the hall. What she didn't know, what no one in that classroom knew, was that someone had been filming. A girl near the back had recorded the whole performance on her phone, from Jason's cruel gift to Tiana's explosive finale. That video was about to change everything. But for now, Tiana walked alone through the hallways of Madison High, still carrying the same violin case. The difference was, now the whole school would know what was inside it. The video hit the internet before the final bell rang, uploaded by a student named Mia Tron, someone who usually stayed quiet, kept her head down, and never got involved in school drama. It was titled simply, "They Mocked Her, and Then This Happened." Within hours, it had thousands of views. By nightfall, it had gone viral. The footage was raw, filmed from the back row, slightly shaky, but the sound was clear. It captured everything. Jason's smug face as he offered the school violin, Brittany's cruel laughter, Chloe's eye roll, and Tiana's quiet refusal to respond. Then came the music. Even through phone speakers, it was mesmerizing. There was something so jarring, so unexpected about watching someone so calm, so silent, unleash such power. Comments poured in faster than Mia could read them. She didn't just play. She spoke with that violin. "Shame on those kids who laughed. Karma came fast. Who is she? Please tell me she gets a scholarship or something." It wasn't just students commenting. Alumni, parents, local musicians, even a few reporters. The internet had a way of sniffing out injustice and devouring it with precision. By the next morning, local news trucks were parked outside Madison High. Inside, the atmosphere had shifted. Jason walked into school with his hoodie up, head down. The confident swagger was gone. He avoided eye contact. His phone had exploded overnight, not with praise, but with backlash. Messages flooded his DMs. "You racist prick. You got wrecked. Hope it was worth it, golden boy." His parents had called the school at 7 a.m., demanding to know what was being done to protect their son from cyberbullying. But even they couldn't deny what they saw in the video. Brittany was crying in the bathroom before second period. Not because she felt guilty, at least not yet, but because she couldn't handle the blow to her image. Her TikTok was flooded with comments, most of them brutal. One person reposted an old video where she'd mocked another girl and captioned it, "She's been doing this for years." Chloe, who had been the quietest of the trio, tried to play innocent. "I wasn't part of it," she told anyone who would listen. "I didn't say anything mean." But silence in the face of cruelty is just a quieter form of complicity. And the internet knew it. Meanwhile, Tiana, she didn't even have social media. When she arrived at school that morning, she had no idea why so many students were staring. Not with ridicule, but with a strange mix of awe,
curiosity, and something else. Respect. She sat at her desk in first period when Mr. Denvers entered with an unusually tense expression. He cleared his throat, glanced around the room, then looked directly at her. "Tiana, can I speak with you outside for a moment?" Her heart sank. Was she in trouble? Was this about the video? About her playing in class? She followed him into the hallway. To her surprise, waiting there was Principal Harris, a tall, severe-looking woman with short silver hair and sharp eyes. She wasn't alone. Standing beside her was a woman in a tailored suit, holding a manila folder, and a man with a press badge around his neck. "Tiana," Principal Harris began, her tone more measured than usual. "We've received some attention, positive attention, and I'd like to start by apologizing to you." Tiana blinked. For what? For what you endured in that classroom, for what wasn't stopped, for what should have never happened in the first place. The woman in the suit stepped forward. "I'm with the state's Youth Music Scholarship Program. We saw the video. We'd like to talk to you about an opportunity." The man with the press badge smiled. "And I'd like to write about you, with your permission." Tiana felt like the world was spinning. All these people, all this attention, all because she played a song? But it wasn't just the music. It was the context, the build-up, the injustice, the performance. It was everything. By lunchtime, she had to be taken to the counselor's office to process the avalanche of offers, interviews, and media requests. She barely touched her food. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but disbelief. Was this real? In the hallway, students she didn't even know were nodding at her. Some whispered, "That's her." Others smiled. And then there were those who couldn't look her in the eye. Jason was one of them. He sat alone at the lunch table. His usual crew had distanced themselves. Rumors swirled that colleges had already begun reevaluating his applications. His early decision letter to Michigan? On hold. Brittany had been pulled from cheer captain consideration. Chloe's dad, a local businessman, was suddenly fielding uncomfortable calls from clients who'd seen his daughter's name trending, for the wrong reasons. Later that day, the school held an emergency staff meeting. Principal Harris addressed the faculty. "This is a wake-up call," she said firmly. "We failed to protect a student from humiliation rooted not just in cruelty, but in racial bias. We will be reviewing our conduct policies, starting today." Mr. Denvers resigned a week later. Tiana didn't ask for any of it. She didn't play to go viral. She played because it was all she had. But sometimes, the smallest act of truth can unravel an entire system of false confidence. And in this case, one breathtaking performance exposed far more than just 3 cruel teenagers. It exposed a school's silence, a community's blind eye, and a girl who refused to be anyone's joke ever again. A full year had passed since that day in the classroom. And yet, for Tiana Brooks, the memory of it still lived inside her, clear, electric, and echoing like the last note of a song that refused to fade. She stood backstage at the Governor's Youth Arts Gala, wearing a sleek, dark blue gown that shimmered under the lights like ocean water. Her braids were wrapped into an elegant crown, her violin polished to a shine. In her hands, she held not just an instrument, but the weight of a story the world had finally learned to listen to. Hundreds of people sat in the grand auditorium: judges, music educators, patrons of the arts, journalists. But Tiana didn't flinch. Not anymore. In the past year, she had performed across the state. She'd been featured in local newspapers, spoken at high schools about race, bullying, and resilience. She'd even met Kayla Reeves, the world-renowned black violinist who had reposted her viral video, and spent a weekend training with her. Tiana had changed, but the most powerful change hadn't been on stage or in the headlines. It had been in how she saw herself. No longer small,
no longer invisible, no longer silent. She was announced by the MC as a shining example of courage and talent, and the crowd erupted in applause before she even stepped into the light. Her heart raced, not with fear, but with gratitude. She took her place center stage. A grand piano stood beside her. A single spotlight warmed her skin. She could see the first few rows, her mother wiping away tears, Mr. Holland, dressed in a crisp suit, sitting proudly with his hands folded. Mia, the girl who filmed the original video, grinning like a proud sister. Tiana stepped to the mic. She didn't usually speak before playing, but tonight she knew she had to. She cleared her throat, voice calm but full. "When I first came to Madison High," she began, "I was the new girl, the quiet girl, the girl with the violin. Some people thought that was funny." A quiet ripple of laughter moved through the crowd, uneasy and understanding. "They handed me a violin not to honor me, but to mock me, to break me." She paused. Not for effect, but for breath, for truth. But music isn't a joke, and it's not a weapon unless you use it to humiliate. For me, music became a voice. When I played that day, I wasn't just performing. I was fighting to be seen, heard, known. She looked out across the rows of faces, some tearful, some stunned. "So, tonight," she said, "I play not just for myself. I play for every kid who's ever been laughed at, overlooked, underestimated. This is for you." The hall was silent. Then came the first note, and once again the room transformed. Tiana played a piece she composed herself. It began gently, like memory, mournful, restrained, almost hesitant. Then it swelled, bold, brilliant, with rising crescendos and daring tempo shifts. It was full of fire and grace, like someone breaking chains in rhythm. It was a musical retelling of her journey, from isolation to recognition, from humiliation to triumph. Every note carried echoes of classrooms, stares, whispers, applause. It was the story of one girl, but it felt like it belonged to many. By the final chord, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. The applause came slow at first, almost reverent, then louder, then thunderous. People rose to their feet. Tiana bowed, eyes glassy, lips trembling, and in that moment, she didn't feel small at all. Backstage, as she stepped into the quiet, Mr. Holland was waiting. He smiled and said nothing, just hugged her. "I saw it," he whispered in her ear. "I saw it from the start." Later, as the gala came to a close, Principal Harris approached her. "I owe you more than one apology," she said. "You taught this school something we never should have forgotten." Jason never returned to Madison High. After the scandal, his family moved to another state. Word was, he applied to colleges using a new name. Brittany and Chloe eventually faded into the background, unwelcome reminders of a lesson everyone now remembered. But Tiana didn't gloat. She didn't need revenge. She had something better. She had dignity. And she had a platform. After the gala, she was offered a permanent spot in the state youth orchestra and a scholarship to a prestigious arts academy in New York. She accepted. But before she left town, she visited her old music classroom one last time. She stood in the doorway alone. The chairs were empty. The whiteboard still had faded lines from a half-erased music scale. The same energy lingered in the air, faint but undeniable. She walked over to the chair where she had sat that first day. She placed a sticky note on it. It read, "Sometimes they'll hand you a violin to laugh at you. That's your cue to play so well, they'll never laugh again." She walked out,
violin case in hand. This time, not as the girl mocked for her silence, but as the girl the world now watched and listened to.